Climate Layer. I'm Alex Bonat. If you've been following this show for a while, you know that one of the things I come back to again and again is how misinformation spreads. How a narrative, once it gets loose in the world, takes on a life of its own. How corrections rarely travel as far as the original lie. And how the damage compounds over time in ways that are almost impossible to undo. Today, we're going to look at one of the most striking examples that I have ever come across. And to do that, I've brought in someone who knows this story not just academically, but personally, professionally. Someone who has had to spend years undoing the damage this particular piece of misinformation caused in his own field. Matt Brady is a professional dog trainer and founder of Manageable Mutts. If you have a dog or you know someone who does, and you're anywhere near his world, you should absolutely check him out. He's one of the best in the business, but before he was training dogs, Matt has a degree in chemical engineering. He worked on how to manage systems, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics. He thinks in systems. He understands how things connect, and that background, it turns out, makes him one of the sharpest people I know when it comes to understanding why things go wrong at scale. Matt is also one of my oldest friends. We have worked on projects together that I would describe charitably as ambitious and less charitably as completely unhinged sometimes. Some of them worked, and some of them we just had a lot of fun on. And through it all, I've watched Matt approach every problem the same way. He asks what is actually true, strips out the noise, and builds from there. So when I started thinking about this episode, there was nobody else I wanted to have this conversation with. Because today we're talking about wolves. Specifically, we're talking about a study of wolves. Published, widely read, and became the foundation for one of the most pervasive cultural concepts of the last 50 years. The alpha male, the dominance hierarchy. The idea in any group that someone has to be on top, and they got there through force and aggression and sheer will. That idea is everywhere, in business books, in dating advice, in parenting, in politics, in dog training, in the way people talk about leadership, masculinity, and power. Matt, welcome to the Climate Layer. I'm really glad you're here.
Hey, thanks. It's good to be here.
So let's start at the beginning, because I think a lot of people listening have heard the term alpha wolf. They probably use the word alpha in everyday conversations without thinking twice about it. But most of them have no idea where it actually came from or what the original research actually said. So can we talk about all of that and more?
Oh, absolutely. This is something I spend a lot of time talking with my clients about, and kind of correcting some misinformation out there in the dog training world. So many people have this idea of being the alpha. You have to dominate your dog. This dominance theory, and dominance and submission, and your dog has to be submissive to you, and you need to be the dominant one, and the air quotes here, pack leader. And all this stuff is built around alpha theory, which was originally developed by studying wolves in zoos in the 1930s. There was an animal behaviorist in Switzerland. He studied wolves in zoos in captivity, and he developed this alpha theory based on the behavior he observed there. Now, the error there is that he didn't compare to studying wolves in the wild, and this was later reinforced by a wildlife biologist named David Meck in the 60s and 70s, and him and a lot of wildlife biologists continued upon his research studying wolves in captivity. And in captivity there, you do observe some hierarchical competition, where you have the strongest wolf competing for resources. He gets food first, and some kind of like rolling other wolves over, and traits that could be loosely defined as maybe a dominance and submissive hierarchical structure. The mistake is not studying wolves in captivity, which this group of wildlife biologists, including David Meck, eventually did. And when they studied wolves in the wild, they realized they do not operate with this alpha hierarchy at all. They exist in family units, and they have I think a pack of wolves has like 100 square miles of territory, so they're not confined in a small space. Whereas if you're studying wolves in captivity, you have a whole group of them, non-family members, strangers, packed into a much, much smaller space. It is impossible to meet the needs of wolves in captivity. So their needs aren't met. They're not getting the mental enrichment they need, the physical space to move around that they need. It would be like studying humans in prison and saying that this is the natural way that humans behave.
Wow.
So out in the wild, they exist in family units, and it's a lot more cooperative. And the leader is essentially the mother-father pair of the wolves there. Mm-hmm. And they have, again, like 100 square mile territory that they tend to have as their hunting grounds. And so there's not a lot of competing for resources that way. You don't have the same competition there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is wolves aren't dogs, so there is some difference there. But anyways, after studying this, David Meck and these other wildlife biologists, having previously popularized with books this alpha theory, they learned more, and to their credit, they retracted their studies that had developed the alpha theory, and actually started speaking out against the theory that they had previously helped to make mainstream. So they were trying to undo some of the work they did, like any good scientist would do when they learn more information. You update your theory, but alpha theory had already worked its way into the mainstream culture, because they've been going on since the 1930s, and they built upon it even more. So a lot of people still operate this way. They still think alpha theory is the way to go. They still think they have to be dominant over their dog. They still think, but we've learned so much more in behavioral science since then, and like the whole field has been updated, but people don't know that they've been updated. And it was in the 1980s, I believe. There's Karen Pryor released a book. I think it was called "Don't Shoot the Dog." Mm-hmm. And that started to help popularize a more positive reinforcement method of training. So since like the 1980s, it's been growing more and more within trainers within the field. But we're still like combating a lot of misinformation that this alpha theory has already done. So there is a disparity between what the general public knows and what the experts know.
Yeah.
It's to the point like the American Veterinarian Society of animal behaviors had actually released an official statement letter back in 2008 cautioning against the use of punishment-based methods where you're using like fear or pain to dominate your dog. And later, I think it was 2021, they eventually updated it to just caution against the use entirely, saying that there is no place for these aversive punishment fear-based methods in behavioral modification plans in dog training at all anymore. And so you have...
And this is like shock collars or,
shock collars, prong collars, choke chains. Yeah, this idea of alpha roles and basically ruling by pain and fear.
Yeah.
Because you have to demonstrate that you're the alpha and you're in charge by pushing them down then.
And people that do train that way, they are using, they're talking with a lot of confidence on that, and with
outdated information.
Yeah. And okay. And so when you're, in this, you're sort of basically talking about where the science has shown almost like predominantly that the positive reinforcement training method is the most successful and safest method for, training a dog, raising a dog, etc. Right?
Yes, it's just more. It's more effective over the life of the dog. You don't have the emotional fallout that the punishment based methods have. It's kind of like in parenting. Like if you raise your kid by hitting them when they do something wrong, they might stop a behavior very quickly, but you're going to have some fallout and emotional problems that happen later down the road.
Right. A quick fix that doesn't, creates more damage than good.
Yeah. And that's one of the tricky parts. And I suspect this is similar with misinformation as a whole, is sometimes with misinformation like this, there's a grain of truth there. Because if you punish a dog, you shut a behavior down quickly. it does work. Like it will stop a behavior quickly if a dog is barking, lunging, and you use a shock collar and zap them, or you or hit them. That pain does stop a behavior quickly. So people see in that moment, oh, this works, this is great, and they stop there. They don't think about the long-term effects that has on the dog's emotional state and the problems that emotional dysregulation can cause down the road. So the element of truth that it does work short term, but long term has some more detriment. So it's kind of when I'm talking with my clients, I do have to acknowledge the grain of truth because that's what they're seeing. I can't tell them that what they're seeing isn't real, isn't happening. It's just not anywhere near the complete picture.
Yeah. And
I think that's a problem.
No, sorry, keep going.
Oh yeah, I'm saying, and for me, I'm finding that's part of the problem when I'm talking to some of my clients. Is that they have this information. Many trainers out there in the world, there's a lot of trainers who don't operate with modern behavioral science principles.
Yeah.
A lot of time I'm undoing work that I'm undoing damage that other trainers have done, but I have to explain to them the full picture.
And so, like, as you said, the correction, the scientific correction, the recanting, the adjusted study that exists, right? That existed. It was published. Those researchers wrote about it. They went, to the roofs and screamed about, hey, we have found that we were wrong. We now know better,
and we have the American Society of Veterinary animal behaviorists has a whole statement out against that theory and those methods.
And so
it's like all updated within modern science.
And yet that dominance model, it's still being sold in books and on TV. I guess, my question is, in your opinion, in your experience, why does the correction seem to not travel as far or as fast as that original claim?
In my experience, I think it's because that original claim, before you learn more, and it's by nature, it's more simple because it's the start of the study, the start of developing a theory, but it doesn't have all the information yet. So when you have less information, your theory is going to be a little more simplistic. So it's going to be a little easy, in some ways, easier for the public to understand, easier for them to digest. And as more information comes in, the theory gets more complex and gets harder to follow. And many people in my field, particularly, I think in many fields, don't do a good job of explaining how the theory has been updated. They often start, and I see this with many dog trainers, if they're talking to someone who uses the first methods or a client, they just say, "Oh, that's wrong," and just move on. But they don't acknowledge the pieces of the puzzle that the potential client or another trainer they're talking to has right, and acknowledge what they are seeing, but then build upon that and how more research has been done. It's just this flat denial is, I think, actually drives people further away. But if you can guide them to seeing the right stuff, that conversation takes a little more nuance and a little more patience, of course, which is hard.
And there's also that old adage that the lies will always travel faster than the truth.
And it's also some of these methods, you can see a result quicker. You can see something immediately right in front of you. You shock a dog, they're going to stop barking immediately. It's oh, this works. I can see it right now. Mm-hmm. You can post a good Instagram video about it. It's kind of I know you're the Climate Layer podcast here with Climate. I'm sure you can go into, you see Facebook posts of people going every time it dips below freezing in the winter. Where's your climate change? Where's your global warming now? It's frozen outside because it's and I think just because it's what's right in front of you. And that's how many people operate. They see what's directly right in front of them. They just don't learn to look at the system as a whole. And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of clients I work with. And I find it's, I think having some empathy on my part has been something I've had to develop. Being they're not doing it to be obtuse and to be difficult. It's people's brains really just aren't hardwired to think in larger systems. We're hardwired to see what's directly right in front of us. And it takes a lot more effort to start to think in systems. Mm-hmm. So we kind of need someone to guide them into that.
And I think another thing is, and I've only recorded this episode, the last episode hasn't come out yet at the time of yours and my recording right now. But what I talked about is this idea that when thinking about climate change and thinking about the reality that is our climate is shifting, that global warming is happening, that it can lead to harder hurricanes, more forest fires, more suffering in the world. And there's this accidental judgment that comes from environmentalists for people that are driving a gas car. You should be doing better. You should be doing more. And that can lead to this almost like resistance to accepting the truth. And
Yeah. I see a lot of similar things in the dog
I'd
trainer
love to
world, but
dig
there's a
into
lot
that
of
too.
positive
Yeah. So do you
yeah, where
see, like, I wanted to see if there was a mirror when you're working with misinformation with this idea of the alpha dog or the alpha wolf or the alpha owner. Like, is that something you're seeing in your field? And you were just saying,
yeah, like there's a lot of uh, uh, positive reinforcement trainers who are using modern behavioral science methods in their training, but they start like shaming and attacking trainers who use more aversive methods. Which I understand the impulse, because what these trainers are doing is wrong. They don't realize it's wrong. And that's the tricky part. Is like, we as trainers see them doing something wrong. We want to emotionally jump in and say, stop that, look at what they're doing. This is horrible. This is terrible. But if we jump to going on the attack, we end up it seems like we entrench them and their clients, the people they're reaching, people who follow them. They get more entrenched because their defenses go up right away, because we're attacking them, telling them they're wrong, telling them they're horrible people, they shouldn't be doing that, rather than trying to reach across and educate them or talk to them and think, why are you using these methods? And that's one of the things I try to work with my clients. Like, if they're using a prong collar, I'm like, why are you using this method? What is the reason for that? And then I can try to address that reason with an alternative method, say that, and I'll move to something else. But I have to at least acknowledge why they're doing that in the first place to try to reach them. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, like, when comparing the two as in the misinformation around the alpha wolf and the misinformation around climate change or renewable energy or EVs, etc. The one thing that I find striking about this story from the alpha side is that the original researcher wasn't a bad actor. They were not trying to mislead anyone. You know, they had methodology. I'm just gonna keep going. Methodological mistakes, and they spent the rest of their careers trying to correct it to this day. And so,
yeah, like, they were operating in good faith based on the information they had gathered at the time. It's like they weren't trying to deceive anybody. They weren't being bad people.
And so, like, from that lens, does that change how we think about fighting misinformation? Because in a lot of cases, we're not dealing with liars when we talk about misinformation. I feel like when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, I say that disinformation is intentional. It's funded and put together by interests that want to promote and spend money and resources on getting the lie out there. Misinformation is the reaction to that disinformation.
At least in the dog training world, I would say misinformation is much more common. People just genuinely misinformed.
Yeah.
Not being bad actors, not trying everything. Like, most clients I work with, most trainers I see who do go by this alpha theory, they don't have all the information, and they are trying to do the best that they can, and they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're training the correct way, just because that's all they know. They don't know the rest of the system. They don't understand the nervous system. They don't understand emotional dysregulation in dogs. They don't understand arousal regulation. They don't understand how an internal state can affect external behavior, or how they can cause an unintended emotional state that leads to a much worse external behavior later down the road. It's a little short-sighted. It's just not understanding the full system.
Yeah.
But it's not deliberately mean. They're not trying to be bad people.
Yeah.
But we have an impulse to attack them as bad people and assume that they're bad people because they're operating incorrectly. And I think in general, with counter and misinformation, at least in my field, I'm finding we need a lot more empathy, patience, and understanding to how to reach these people and communicate with them and bring them over to a more educated side.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so climate science, it does have a similar problem. The research is clear, the consensus is overwhelming, and yet a significant portion of the population either doesn't believe or they feel genuinely uncertain. And so when you look at what happened with the Alpha Wolf study and you look at what is happening with climate, I love how you talk about, having to meet people where they are, having to approach it with empathy, with patience, and because when looking at these patterns between these misinformation strategies and how society is adopting them, I guess the New York Times in December of 2025, they published an article where climate scientists basically said that we're losing the war on misinformation and we don't really know how to stop it, how to try to win it back. And so that's why I love conversations like this, where we can talk to people that are constantly fighting their war on misinformation on a daily basis. And so, kind of digging into that, when you're talking about meeting people where they are, approaching them with sort of emotional intelligence, with a safer environment, providing the facts. Can you talk about it in a way like those patterns that you see that would help anyone that's combating misinformation or established, perceptions off the bat that really need to be, how do I say this politely, just kind of like weaned out?
Yeah, and like I like that term weaned out because it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a single conversation.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you're talking with someone who maybe uses like a shock collar on the dog, a prong collar, all sorts of methodologies. And then maybe in like a couple conversations, a couple sessions, I managed to convince a person to stop using the shock collar, but they're still using a prong collar to walk their dog on. And I have to, rather than condemn that person for still using a prong collar, congratulate them for understanding enough to stop using the shock collar, and they're making progress. Because it's not, and again, it's not going to happen immediately. People don't change their minds entirely overnight. It takes time to change a single person's mind. I'm generally not going to get them to do a whole 180. I know it's kind of, we have this like TV show movie idea where a character suddenly switches around to the right side, but realistically that takes them weeks, months, years to fully come around. But we can make little bits of progress by explaining to them bit by bit, like giving them the bit of information that they're ready for, that they can hear, that they can process. Because if I just info dump a ton onto an individual, it's like so much information coming at them, their nervous system gets overwhelmed and they can only process so much information at once.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I mean, because I don't think I've ever talked about this on the podcast, but I used to be a ski instructor. And what I learned from a teaching people perspective, and I think when you have taught people, Matt also does martial arts, folks. When you have,
I was a martial arts instructor, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, MMA, boxing. Yeah, I've done a lot of teaching.
Yeah, and so when we've talked, you and I have talked about teaching in the past. What I've learned from our conversations is that when you can't do that info dump, when you're trying to do one of two things, teach somebody from scratch, or it's even harder when you're trying to get them to unlearn bad habits.
Yeah, if they're unlearning bad habits, could be tricky.
There's that like rule of threes, is that like, try to give people 3 things to work on as you're educating them or trying to teach them something new so that they can adopt, change habits, and move forward onto the next thing.
Yeah, or even less, depending on the person. Yeah. Sometimes it's like really hard for them to grasp them. Sometimes it's like give them one thing. But yeah, like the idea is just like give them as much as they're ready for, what they're ready for. And very similar, like learning theory teaching is very similar to dog training generally, where I can only progress at the rate that the dog is ready for, just like I can only progress at the rate that this person is ready for.
Yeah.
And it's more about, in dog training, getting them to process information. It's more about getting them ready to process more information rather than just throwing the commands and the cues and all the tricks and all the skills at them. I have to teach them to regulate their nervous system to get ready to receive the information. It's just like that with people. I need them to be ready to receive the information, and that comes with talking to them in a very patient way and not just lecturing at them, but listening to what they're saying and their preconceived notions they might have, and listening to questions that they might have. Like teaching someone, teaching a dog, a person, whether I'm teaching them martial arts or teaching them dog training, it's a conversation. It's a dialogue. It's not just a lecture where I'm just sitting there spewing information at them. I have to be receptive to comments, ideas that they have, or questions that they have, and be open to that. And again, go at a pace that they are ready for, that they can receive. And I'll check in with them, be like, okay, is this making sense so far? And if it's not, we'll slow down and address what's not making sense.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, and this is why I'm really glad that we can talk, because when it comes to dealing with misinformation in general, I think that approach probably applies across the board, whether it's anti-vaxxers or people dealing with misinformation in different legal states, different countries, different worlds, different systems, and of course in climate misinformation, when it comes to electric vehicles or renewable energy. When you're working with people one-on-one with their dogs or anyone at all, you have to correct deeply held beliefs, as we've been talking about. And they're learning those beliefs from a flawed source or a flawed system. And so I love that you're talking about what actually works. And I think what's really helpful and healthy from this conversation is, even though the climate layer is about all these different topics, the 9 planetary boundaries, all these different things that we're dealing from an environmental perspective, which I would love for us to continue talking about in the future in so many different topics, but especially for today, what you're doing on the ground and in the field, where you're meeting people where they are and finding this safe and patient and successful way of it, I don't want to say converting people. I think it's just like you have data, science-backed data that shows the most effective and healthiest system, style, training methodology that creates a healthy and I've said healthy like 20 times, but a strong relationship with an individual's dog. And
yeah, and I like what you said there, where you're like, it's like not so much converting people, because I think converting, using that phrase, like it's tempting. A lot of us want to convert someone to our side,
right,
but I think that's a mistake. It's like we're not on different sides. We're all people. At least in the dog training world, we're on the dog side. Both of us are on the dog side. Me and the client I'm working with, the other trainers that use methods I don't agree with, we're still on the dog side. They still do want what's best for the dog.
Right.
There is this whole like idea of like sides, and converting people kind of divides us more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that we're just having dialogue and trying to educate each other.
Yeah.
We're all trying to get on the same page with what the information really is.
Yeah, and to step on my soapbox, unfortunately or fortunately or whatever it is, when dealing with climate, the side, I also agree. I truly believe this. It's not about who believes in climate change and who doesn't. At the end of the day, it's about helping the people, like doing what we can to help the people that are suffering the most due to climate inaction or just the climate shifts and changes, but then also making life easier and more economically healthy, or just, making our backyards healthier so that our dogs can enjoy them instead of, them being a barren wasteland.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's just yeah, but so much was just patient, empathetic communication.
Yeah, I love that.
And just taking the time to explain things to people, like, and again, not just disagreeing with someone and telling them that they're wrong. Like if I have a client who's shocking their dog, I'm not necessarily going to tell them, oh, your alpha theory, you being dominant, is wrong. You should use positive reinforcement instead, which is a true statement. It is true that they should use positive reinforcement instead, but just stopping there doesn't do them any good, because I'm not explaining to them why.
Mm-hmm.
I also need the explanation rather than just the declaration. Yeah. So then I would explain to them, if you're, causing pain, you're stimulating the nervous system. You're going to train the nervous system to upregulate rather than calm down, and explain how that causes some emotional distress. Like you don't teach them to actually be calm. And you can actually use those methods to cause fear at seeing certain triggers and make the underlying emotion that's driving the undesired behavior worse and break out later with time. But if this was a full dog training podcast, I could spend an hour getting into those details more. But essentially, it's trying to walk someone through why that is, rather than just telling them they're wrong and just declaring that something else is correct. I need to actually explain it.
Yeah, I think the one struggle when it comes to having that in order to combat misinformation, you have to be patient. You also have to make the time, if you can, to break through that misinformation barrier and sort of use the truth in a empathetic and strong way, and in a way that makes sense to your audience, right? I think one
Exactly.
strong issue that we've been having across the board is that the speed at which which misinformation can spread, the speed at which it gets out there, and as you're taking time with an individual or with a group of people or a country or a society, as you're taking that, the longer time it takes to try and break through a misinformation barrier, the further behind it feels like you get behind the alpha message, where now, in order to be a good man, you have to be an alpha, that kind of thing, right? And I think we're kind of coming up on the end for
Yeah.
today, but love your thoughts on that, like the importance of staying ahead of it, of taking the time to reach people. What do you do when you don't have a lot of time? How do you break through misinformation when you only have a couple minutes, an hour, whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that is kind of the tricky part because like I mentioned earlier, like with misinformation, it is often built upon like the beginning of a study, the beginning of a theory, but they don't have all the information yet. So that little bit that they have is, by its very nature, easier to digest because there's less information to take in.
Right, but
So
it's
it
a
can be
broken
digested
conclusion or
very, very
something, right?
quickly. Yeah, or an incomplete conclusion. Like
Mm-hmm.
they don't have all the information yet. So like the alpha theory, it's a much simpler model, and it's easier to digest. It initially feels good. It can make some degree of sense very quickly. Whereas like a positive reinforcement method, the modern behavioral science, it does take more effort, more explanation, more understanding to really start to grasp that theory. So it does take more time to take that theory in and start to understand it all the way. Whereas like the alpha theory, you can kind of take it in very quickly and move on.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a much higher percentage of people that can just adopt that theory in an instant almost. Whereas the modern behavioral science methods take more education, more digging, and people need to be willing to take the time to dig into that. And that really happens with conversations.
Yeah.
I think it's just recognizing, we almost have to recognize that our method, that when you're dealing with a more complete theory, it is by nature going to take a little bit longer to explain than an incorrect theory will. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And then I think, and something else you said earlier, if you come at the conversation in a way where it's I'm right, you're wrong, then it's almost like you've already lost the fight or lost the
Yeah,
conversation.
exactly. Because I'm already getting someone on on the defensive. I'm telling them they're wrong. They're going to feel like they're being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Where I don't want a debate with someone, I want a conversation
Yeah.
with someone because that's how we really make like change happen, and that's how
Yeah.
we really start to convince each other. And the other side is there. If I'm talking to someone, maybe they have a point on something. Maybe like a 1, 2, 3, 5, 10% of what they're saying is right, and they might have a point, and I might still be able to learn something from them as well. Like I
Right.
still have to be open to that possibility.
Right. 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 That's how we learn together.
Yeah, it's like with the alpha stuff, like and punishment-based methods. Like I have to be open to the fact that it does work. You do see results.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, very quickly, and in the moment you see them right away, and that's why people believe it so much, because you do see a result very quickly. Again, they just don't understand the full system over the whole life of the dog, how it ends up making the behavior worse over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And I've seen that time and time again. um, but I do have to recognize the bits of truth that are there and have to be able to build within there, where if I even start to deny that, oh no, it doesn't work at all, never works, people are going to see, people are going to see that I'm incorrect, because it does very quickly.
Yeah.
So I have to not be disingenuous and just deny everything someone says,
You're right.
but I have to.
And that's
Yeah,
emphasizing the meeting people where they are rather than
exactly.
trying to push them somewhere else. All right, well, I've got one more question for today.
Sure.
If you could go back and change one thing about how the Alpha Wolf research was published, distributed, or communicated, what would it be? And, does that answer hopefully tell us anything about what we should do differently with climate science right now?
Yeah. It would have been like some of the criticisms of the early studies was that they only studied wolves in zoos, that they didn't study wolves out in the wild. So I would have had that study back in the 30s compare to the wolves in zoos and compare that to wolves out in the wild before they published all the way. Or have a caveat in there that these are wolves, in a zoo and they have more research is needed. I would like to see them wait to publish a full study and develop an entire theory until they had the comparative information to go off of. And I think that would have come up with a more robust theory, and it would have said something much more profound about animals exist in their natural state versus in captivity.
Yeah, so par for the course, the Matt Brady way, the systems thinking lens, the importance of, seeing it from the grand scale, right? Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, Matt, while this is, we're not digging into the deep science of, specific climate science or different various planetary boundaries, but again, this podcast is at its core about how do we address misinformation and how do we help the truth connect with people as effectively as possible. And so these conversations that you and I have, and I really hope we can continue to have again in the future on this podcast.
Absolutely.
This is fun. This is helpful. And hopefully this is providing insights on how other people out there can sort of take this, digest it, and then sort of use some various techniques. Because right now, we're all going to run an experiment on how we can use what techniques are going to be best at combating misinformation. And so I think anything you can add to your gun belt, your ammo belt, I think kind of helps. But long story short, thank you so much for coming online. And I don't know if you have any last words.
Thanks for having me. It's important stuff, and it really, so much of it comes down to is just approaching other people, whether they agree with us or not, with empathy and patience and understanding, because that's how we all can become more educated as a whole.
Yeah, love it. What Matt and I keep coming back to in this conversation is something that sounds simple, but is actually really hard to practice. We are not on different sides. In dog training, you're not on the trainer's side or the owner's side or even the science's side. You're on the dog's side. Every decision, every technique, every conversation with a skeptical client comes back to that. What is best for the animal? In climate, it's the same thing. We're not on the side of believers versus skeptics. We're not trying to win a debate. We are on the side of the people being impacted, the communities facing water scarcity, the farmers watching aquifers disappear, the coastal towns already living with the consequences of a changing climate, and yes, the ecosystems and the animals that cannot advocate for themselves. That reframe matters, because when you approach a conversation about climate from that place, you stop trying to defeat the person in front of you and start trying to reach them. And reaching people requires exactly what Matt and I have talked about here: empathy, patience, education, meeting your audience where they are without judgment, even when the misinformation they are carrying is frustrating, even when the lie got there before you did. The truth is slower than a good lie. We know that. But the truth is more durable. And every person who comes to understand what is actually happening, who sees past the manufactured doubt and finds the real story underneath, that matters. It compounds, slowly and then all at once. So keep looking for ways to stand the truth up. Keep approaching the conversation with empathy. Keep digging into the deeper science, because the deeper you go, the more compelling the true story becomes. And if this episode resonated with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I want to thank Matt Brady for this conversation. Find him at Manageable Mutts. He is one of the best in the business and one of the most thoughtful people I know. As always, keep looking to peel back those layers. I'm Alex Banat, and this is The Climate.